Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, we go deep into the groundbreaking book, Emotional Intelligence for School Leaders, by Dr. Janet Patti and Dr. Robin Stern. This profoundly insightful work argues for social emotional learning as a crucial skill set for K 12 school leaders and provides invaluable coaching on integrating emotional intelligence into leadership practices. We are deeply honored to have with us today two distinguished scholars. Dr. Janet Patti, a former school leader, is the CEO of Star Factor Coaching and founding member of CASEL and a professor emeritus at the Hunter School of Education. Dr. Robin Stern is the co-founder and senior advisor to the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, a licensed psychoanalyst with 30 years of experience, a podcaster, and the author of The Gaslight Effect. I am so excited to have you both here. How are you guys doing?
Great to be here.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much. This is an honor for us as well.
Beautiful. Let's begin with the book. So, the book is titled Emotional Intelligence for School Leaders. Can you tell us about its significance in the current educational landscape?
I'll start if you want, Robin.
Janet, you can begin
Well,
anywhere from
I
that.
just ask you to talk about that significance. You're living it. But what we're finding in the work that we're doing is that so many principals are overwhelmed, overworked. There's a lot of burnout. 1 in 4 tend to leave. They can't, it gets to be too much despite how dedicated they are and how much they love their jobs. It's hard to have a balance. And especially post pandemic. So we are in very complex times, very uncertain times. There's a lot of doubt, a lot of I don't want to say depression because there's some of that, but there's almost a sadness and a loss of hope. So, Robin, do you want to add to that?
Well, I would definitely say that there there is a sadness and a loss of hope, some inability to feel the same way they used to about the future, that they could have the kind of agency that they sometimes felt they had, not often, but certainly before the pandemic, before current administration's decisions, they people in education we spoke to were more hopeful. And but I would add that administrators and principals, all of us, needed this book yesterday.
Yes.
Um, and I think that we titled the book to capture that spirit that there has to be emotional intelligence and leadership connected. Leaders, when Janet, I mean, this is actually a part of a great story, which is when Janet and I met each other, and we many years ago, and we began to talk about our different backgrounds. And of course, I asked the question, well, what is the education for school leaders in emotional intelligence? And what did you say, Janet? There is not.
So, yeah. Yeah.
And that was shocking to me because one of the reasons that I moved from being a therapist full time to education was when my children went to school and I began to think who is who is in front of those classrooms and who is leading the schools and what is the training that those people have in the whole lives of children and other adults.
Beautiful. I love in the book, I feel I get to know both of you because you both tell stories, and it's so amazing that an educational leader and a psychoanalyst join forces to support school leaders because it's obviously that many of us are drowning in the landscape of being a principal, assistant principal, or a school leader. So let me ask you, how do emotional intelligent leaders balance the responsibility for academic achievement with the well-being of their staff and students?
That's a great question. Not easily, but if they're emotionally intelligent, they have the skill sets. They know when enough is enough. They know that well being is critical because if they don't have that, they have nothing. They have strategies and skills that they've learned over time and that they've consciously chosen to improve for themselves. I think that school leaders who are emotionally intelligent see the big picture. They know systemic awareness. They know what they can do and they can't. They know what they have to do to bring in others. They know that they're about being transformational. That's the only way they could start working with themselves and then with their staff. And that ultimately that SEL will get into the classroom for the kids. So,
I'll jump in and just reiterate what you said in a little bit of a different way. They start with themselves. That's how they do it. And as Janet described, working on their own, taking the time every day, if not multiple times a day, to reflect on themselves. What just happened? Why am I feeling this way? What kind of strategy can I use to move past this moment? We have an expression at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, name it to tame it. So the more you understand about how you're feeling in a given moment, the better able you are to choose an effective and helpful strategy to move you past that moment. Doesn't mean you're not having those feelings, but you're managing them in a different way and or an effective way. And the other piece is really as a leader, having a good sense of, who on my faculty is driving me crazy and what is it about and how and who am I driving crazy? And that's really important too, because we think all the time about, boy, these people, I can't work with them. They really need management strategies, right? But how often do we think about how we are impacting the people we're working with? So the basics, the self-awareness as the basis
absolutely.
for developing all the other skills of emotional intelligence is critical for school leaders every day as they're making decisions to step into a meeting, to a conversation, to do their own work, to pick up the phone. They are making decisions and they need to know where they are.
Wow. Like that opens a really important part of the book because often administrators, at least when I began as a principal, I thought I had to come with this mission of fixing everyone
Mm.
because I had all the answers, and that arrogance. Uh, People could feel it, so that it was very difficult at the beginning to start doing this, and it was not until I started learning about emotional intelligence to realize, well, I have to begin with me to understand I'm being an asshole. I'm not really listening to people. I'm just telling them to do.
Mm.
So, thinking about the book, can you name one or two strategies that the book suggests about on how to maintain the well-being and the resilience amidst this high stress level often associated with educational leadership positions?
Well, I'm going to start with a story of someone who is in the book. And Dr. Brooke, at the beginning of the pandemic, who I hope she's listening to this. She's a beautiful human and brilliant woman, brilliant leader, and an emotionally intelligent leader. So she has studied with us a long time ago, met Janet, and I've come to know her through the years. Um, she has led the implementation of the ruler approach in her school, in her amazing high school. And at the beginning, she spoke with me at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout about how she decided that there was nothing more important in that time than the well-being of everyone in that building. And that in order for teachers to communicate that to students, they had to feel held, they had to feel connected. And we know that being connected, having social support is a key ingredient for well-being and resilience. And so she gathered her faculty every morning. It was the first thing that happened in the school and said, "How are you?" Gave people the room to talk, held the space, and people, when that's happening, when you know your leader cares about you in that way and is devoted and dedicated to your well-being and gives you the space to say, you know, if your kids need this kind of attention today, this is the kind of attention you give them. You can give the math test tomorrow. I hope that's okay for Brooke to know that I'm saying that out loud, but that is the truth. That was the truth of her experience during the pandemic.
That was
Well,
Dawn, right?
it was Brooke.
And then Brooke. Okay,
It
yeah,
was Brooke.
yeah,
It was Brooke.
yeah,
And Dawn did the same.
yeah,
Dawn also is an incredible leader, now the assistant superintendent of the school,
yeah.
deputy superintendent. Sorry, I lost the titles in education for a minute. And she was in a school, the Thurgood Marshall Lab School. No, that's Brooks School. Sorry,
Brooke
I'm getting confused
Left,
with the titles.
Sister
But
Thurgood, yeah,
Dawn was in Thurgood Marshall Academy, and for many years as the leader. And she
little
also
ones.
well-being first. Yes, her kids were elementary school. They started every day with meditation, and the meditation that was led by the 5-year-olds, the fifth graders. Yeah, well-being
Beautiful.
first.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And you
Thank you
walk
so
into
much.
that school, I just have to add to this, you walk
Yeah.
into that school and there's music in the morning, incredible meditative music. What better to set a tone?
Yes, exactly. And the
I love that.
mood meter lessons, and meta moment lessons throughout the day. Teachers required to put them in their agenda every single day, not necessarily at the same time, having agency over when they can include the tools and skills of emotional intelligence in the ruler program, but required to bring them in.
How impactful it really starts. Graduation starts in early childhood. So exciting. Let me ask you, how do emotional intelligent teachers handle difficult situations? For example, addressing teacher performance. There is a part in the book where you guys mention something like it is, we acknowledge that it's difficult, that sometimes the education leader has to take the livelihood
Yeah.
of an educator in order to ensure the students in the schools get the best education. How can educational leaders address that?
I'm going to take that from the point of view of empathy. And I think we talk a lot about empathy in the book because it is very critical to school leaders to be empathic towards everyone, even the ones that aren't great that you just want to pull your hair out with. But I think that having empathy helps them get by knowing that what they're doing is putting the kids first, and that's critical. And so that helps. My husband is a retired principal, and he always says, I'm the professor, but he's the principal. So, and I want to say that he's told me many stories. In the first when he first started, like it was hard. He was like, okay, I'm just going to set the rules and I'm going to do it. And after 12 years of doing it, things were very different. But the one thing that he said was when he had a difficult person who he knew that he was not going to want to stay there because they just were not cutting it and they were just not good for kids. He would actually use his empathy in that discussion to just not to agree with the teacher, but to have the teacher feel in such a way, well, this person doesn't hate me. And in such a way, by being honest in a way that someone can hear, it made it more digestible for the person. Now, that doesn't happen in all cases, and it certainly doesn't happen with all principals. But when you're honest as best you can be, it makes a big difference. And when you care, it makes a big difference for people.
And we also find in thinking about empathy that being an empathic leader can have its challenges, that you can be stuck, for example, in an empathic position with a teacher thinking, how can I fire them? They are like, they're the sole support at home. How can I let them go? They are, I'm just, I can't do it. her mother is ill, or whatever it is that you know about the person. So in your effort to be that empathic leader, you're getting to know people, and then your own empathy, standing in their shoes, can be really hard to move past. And Janet and I talk about this quite a bit. So what happens? So you have to remember that you have to stand in your own shoes too, right? And you have to be the leader of that school. And you need to say, yes, I feel terrible about this, and I'm going to have to do it
And
anyway.
yeah, yeah. And it's managing their own emotions. So self-management is an antidote to
Really
being
good
too
point.
empathic.
Yes. Yeah.
It is such a I remember when I began as a principal, um I thought that you have to lead with sympathy. So I will suffer with my teachers, I will
Mhm.
suffer with my students. And I remember I had a mental breakdown when the sister of one of my students died in a car accident. And when I started doing research on emotional intelligence, it led me to so many different ways, and it led me to research on nurses and physicians. And I learned that through there, you have to love your students and your staff like a physician or a nurse in an emergency room. If they come suffering and you start suffering with them, you cannot heal, you
Mm.
cannot support. They need you to be strong, they need you to be calm and mindful about the situation, because they need you to be in your best element. So once again, your book has so many stories, numerous examples of people that are exactly going through this, and how it is possible to live a successful life and being a principal, even though you have all these responsibilities, um, and challenges. So
Can I just jump
yeah,
in?
please.
I'm going to be, just because I work a lot with physicians and nurses as well, and
Yes.
did through the pandemic at Yale New Haven Hospital, and just found it incredibly rewarding, and just beautiful human beings I work with, and many still do. And like nurses, teachers have to find time that they don't have, or leaders have to find time that they don't have for themselves. And so that's the biggest challenge. So here you are, being in this, having your own feelings, and yet having to manage your feelings so that you can be the leader in the moment. I mean, during the pandemic, this was very clear for leaders and for nurses and doctors as well. Everyone was scared, and yet they had to take leadership. And one of the things that Dr. Dawn told us, um, which I was so important because all leaders were feeling it, it was really hard to find those other people to talk to. Not because there weren't other people out there suffering and struggling and being anxious, but because there was no time. You were so busy caretaking that how were and you, people in leadership, and you know this, Janet, having been in leadership, and Dr. Ephraim, you know this, being in leadership, you don't want people to think you are scared.
Right.
And yet you want to be transparent. This is hard for all of us. But then those bigger, scarier feelings you're keeping on the inside. And we know when you're keeping feelings on the inside and showing something else on the outside, which we call emotional labor, it's exhausting. And so when do you restore? And that's very similar in nursing, in medical life, and in education.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Let me ask you, uh, building a supportive, positive environment in the school is a big challenge for educational leaders. I can only think about whenever you see something on TV or in the news about a teacher or an educational leader, 9 out of 10 times is something catastrophic, something awful. And even when you go into social media like TikTok and Instagram, when you see something about teaching, it's always almost mocking the profession, like, oh, it's Monday, this is me on Monday, or oh, I can't wait for Friday to come. Like like you are suffering throughout the week, yet educational leaders have to come and get everybody pumped, everybody like positive, working towards a common mission. what are some strategies educational leaders can do to try to bring this positivity to schools?
Oh gosh, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is being inclusive, and that they're all teachers have a buy-in and an ownership in the vision of the school. I mean, just from almost a more technical point of view, that is a critical piece. And many leaders, I can't, oh, so many leaders that we've seen, that we know, that are still very top down, never bring people into the room to think with them, make all the decisions by themselves. Now, how do we think those people are feeling out there? And how do we see that culture and that climate? It's just dead. And so when you come to an emotionally intelligent leader, it's contrary. It's completely, it's everybody's got a voice. Everybody's part of the picture. Everybody feels they belong, and they feel they have something to give. And that makes such a huge difference. So even if the principal's like, and you think of this, I'm sure you every day you've done this when you've had a tough time at home or something happening, and you get to the door and you go, okay. And as Robin said, you don't want to be in emotional labor, so you just be who you are, knowing what your boundaries are, what you have to, what you can share and what you can't share, and you know that because you're emotionally intelligent and you spend time on you.
I would
Beautiful.
say also, as you were talking, I was thinking that that we all have choice over what we focus on, right? And so um, I was thinking about our um, ruler, the ruler program, and or the ruler approach, and the best self, and
Mhm.
how many of our teachers and leaders would say when they woke up in the morning, okay, so who is my best self? How do I leave my house today? How do I enter the school building as my best self? And if my best self is someone who, let's say, is really committed to psychological safety in the room or in the community, or my best self is really committed to everyone else having a great day, focusing on others and what they need rather than, oh God, I just can't move my body one more inch this week, or I can't listen to one more conversation. Okay, so shift your focus. Who's your best self as a school leader? And stepping into that power as your best self. Take a pause when you have your hand on the doorknob of that meeting that you know is going to irritate you. And think about the other people sitting in the meeting. What do they need? I'm the
Mhm.
leader. What can I give the people who are there to hear me speak this morning? How can I create psychological safety, as Janet said, so that everyone has a feeling of belonging, so that everyone has a voice in the room, so that everyone feels like they can speak their mind, which includes saying something that may not be very popular.
I just
Abs-
want to add to what Robin said because that's so important. The skill that I think we teach, which is very common and a lot of people use, but so many people still don't know, it's active listening. You, how do we listen? And if we use that skill, I mean, it has been known to save marriages, save big conflicts from getting even more grandiose. And in schools, a principal has to constantly be actively listening, and that's exhausting if you're doing that all day long. But it's critical to listening to people, to letting them know they're being listened to be able to clarify what they're saying and not just think they're saying something,
Yeah.
to be able to summarize at the end of a conversation so everybody's on the same page. So I would say that's we find that for many of the people we're teaching and we're working with, that they say that active listening has been very critical to them.
Beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate it. In two parts of the book, they are very briefly towards I would say towards the beginning of the book, but more profoundly towards the middle. The issue, the concept of power, right? Uh, Leading a school in many ways is like a chess game. There's so many things that can happen, and there's a mentioning that sometimes, or there's a suggestion that educational leaders might use emotional intelligence for Machiavellian purposes, while others study power to bring positivity in the dynamics of school. Um, can you talk about the importance of having this concept? Because it can be a controversial topic because immediately people jump into, oh, it's just negative. You just want to master, dominate people, when in reality, it's more about, in my opinion, but what do I know, is that you want to get the best out of each person, so you in a way study each person so they can be the best versions of themselves. What are your thoughts?
So, you want to start, Robin? Or because
Yeah,
I'm not, I know I wanted to. I'm not sure. I'm really clear what you're asking because it's a big piece. Are you
yeah,
asking?
go
Yeah, if
ahead.
you could clarify a little bit the
Sure.
question. All right.
So the moment the conversation of power and schools come in, sometimes they don't merge well,
Right.
because unfortunately in most schools there's always this us versus them mentality. When
Hmm.
someone becomes an administrator, they say, oh, you're joining the dark side, right? And I am a proponent that concepts of power can be used for the good instead of to dominate people. And in
Absolutely.
your book there's two mentionings, there's two sections on that,
Yes.
and I wanted to know your thoughts about it.
I can start now that I'm clear, if it's okay, Robin.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking that, first of all, people also have a negative perception of power, right? That power is, as you said, a bad thing. And the reality is powers could be wonderful and very important if one embraces their power. You don't want leaders who don't embrace their power because then they're not going to be as effective. You have to be in your present self really as a source of someone looked up to, I think, as Robin mentioned earlier. And so, and then there are many different types of power. So, first of all, people have individual kind of self power or referent power, or where somebody just sees you and knows that you are grounded and that you're someone they could depend on and trust in, that you'll be there for them, and that you're going to make decisions sometimes that they're not going to like. And so the way
Mhm.
you have to do that, in my opinion, I've seen it done. I've been fortunate to have really good leaders that have taught me, and I've seen the other ones too. But when somebody who's really a strong leader who has their power, they 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 are respected and loved and looked up to, as opposed to somebody who comes in the room and is not able to stand up and use their power. And sometimes you have to use your position power, and you just have to say, I'm the principal and I'm going there. No matter
Mhm.
how emotionally intelligent you are, you just, because every single individual in that school is another human being with a different way of thinking, feeling, and has a whole different set of mental models. So that would be my first response to thinking about power, Ephraim. I think,
Love it.
yeah.
So I was thinking about this organization I was one of the founders of many years ago called the Woodhull Institute for Ethical Leadership. And while we're no longer in existence, our definition of ethical leadership was the compassionate use of power.
Wow.
I love that.
Wow.
And so I think it's really important for the leaders to step into their authority as compassionate and powerful people, because that's what people need in a leader. But at the same time, since we know the skills of emotional intelligence are values agnostic, like we can use those skills for to gaslight people. One of the things that I
Uh,
a lot of time thinking about, and manipulate people, because as you were saying, getting to know people, listening to people means that you now have information that you could use not in the service of the good, but in the service of the dark side, if you so choose.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, not everyone is mentally healthy, and not everyone has the same values. And people do sometimes rise into leadership positions because they're really smart or they're good at getting things done. And frankly, the relational piece of leadership is the study of that is late to popular speak. We're talking about it. People are talking about it now, but it really is a missing piece, how to have good relationships. And as Janet said, how to listen as a leader, and how to create, as Amy Edmondson talks about all the time, how to create psychological safety. And so how do you, if you can be in a power position, be clear about your where you're going, share, give people the room to speak out about their vision, but have a vision and be able to corral and to gather people to move towards that vision. Uh, I think that's the compassionate use of power.
Yes. Beautiful. I absolutely love it. Compassionate use of power.
Yeah, that's
So,
beautiful.
oh, absolutely. Let me ask you, as you know, self-awareness is that first step in emotional intelligence, yet many of us miss the mark. What are one or two things that a person can do to enhance their self-awareness?
Well, I'm going to just say from the principal's point of view at this time, and I think it's a big part of where we focus with them is you have to be able to be open to feedback. You have to be able to hear how other people think and not be afraid of it. So there's a certain amount of vulnerability that you need to have in order to be able to go there for yourself, and to also then show as a leader that you do have that self-awareness, and you gain that self-awareness through lots of work, and we do lots of work with people. But the first thing I'll say, and then let Robin add to that, is there's not enough can be said about the power of reflection, about journal writing, about spending time in mindfulness and meditation. And, fortunately, as a society, we're moving more in that direction now. And probably because everybody's so burnt out,
Mhm.
But I think that those are some of the ways. And for us, with our coaching, it really helps leaders really think about where they are and where they want to be and how they want to
Beautiful. Thank
So I
you.
think that that was beautiful, Janet, and I completely agree, and I would have started there as well, um, with
be.
journal writing and meditation and reflection, and but even before that, just shifting mindset, like to think about what do I is it important to me to be aware of how I'm coming across to other people? Is it
Mm,
important to me? And these are conversations I think important to have in the school, just like psychological safety. How do you get it? Well, how do you get a community of self-aware leaders, right? How do you how do you grow that? How do you make it happen? Well, it has to be part of the conversation. It has to be priority, because if you don't know that you're a bull in a china shop when you walk into a meeting, then you're not going to continue. You're not going to work on it because there's no reason to work on it. We have this great cartoon that we often show when we're talking about self-aware emotional intelligence assessments, and it's a pussycat looking into a mirror and seeing a lion,
Um,
right? Like
mhm.
people are across the board not very good, in fact, pretty bad at accuracy
right.
in self-awareness.
You got that right. You
And
got that
I one of the things that I remember from years ago when we were talking in our own staff, like, how do you come across to other people? Well, it takes a lot of courage to ask that question, to have that conversation. And I'm somebody who lives in, do you know the mood meter?
yes.
Okay,
I
so
have it in my office.
all right. So I'm someone who lives in the green, and for our audience, someone who is pretty much every day in a pleasant mood, and I wake up happy, and I approach the world with a positive attitude. But the one thing that can derail me immediately is if I'm worried about my children.
Mm.
Mm,
So I was going through a hard time years ago with my son or my daughter. I can't remember one of them. They're adults now, so they each had their their moments. And I remember that one of my colleagues said, "Well, you spend a lot of time in the red. You're anxious." And I actually thought about it, and I realized that the reason he thought that was that I did not talk about, "Gee, I feel great today, or it's a great day, and I didn't socialize. I didn't out loud what I was feeling when I was in the green, or just more routinely during the day. Um, but when I was anxious about my kids, I would talk about it. And so that was all the
Uh,
information this particular colleague had about me. And I think that's really important. What is it you're saying to people, not just what you're feeling? And if you're only giving people a piece of yourself and they only get to see one thing, that's what their impression is of you. So it's part of it is also um, a little bit of relationship management on the outside.
yeah.
I love
So
it. It's like what your peer Mark Brackett says, having that emotional literacy, putting words into what we feel. Let's take a quick second to celebrate the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So in chapter 4, you go about the importance about self-management for school leaders. Can you explain why managing emotions is considered the most crucial skills for leaders?
you want to start, Robin?
Well,
Uh,
I think dealing with feelings, which is actually the name of Mark Brackett's new webcast, and highly
Ooh,
recommend it. Dealing with feelings is probably the most important thing for everyone, and we have feelings all day long. And when we are aware of them and we can manage them, then we are in charge of ourselves. But if we are not able to deal with our feelings, then our feelings can surprise us, can leak through, can control us in a given moment. And I apologize for that
that's
noise
okay.
around. And so I think that it's a great gift to know what you're feeling and then to be able to deal with it in the moment so
Absolutely.
that you can continue the conversation, so that you can continue the meeting, so that you can be effective in editing your document.
Nobody wants to see somebody who's out of control.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so emotional self-control is a critical part of self-management. And as a leader in a school, I mean, can you imagine if you're up there freaking out and and they're all watching you? Oh, when they, as you said earlier, Efrain, the rift that exists naturally between teachers and leaders, well, now they've got more data. Oh, he
Yes.
should be in that job, Oh, so you have to be so careful about how people see you.
Well,
And
and people feel you
and
as
yes,
well. So your emotions are contagious. And so
yes,
you're the leader and you have the power. And so your emotions, especially if they're big emotions, they a crabby leader means a crabby meeting, right? And when you are dysregulated and you are having a conversation with somebody, that someone is going to feel that. And
mhm,
it is absolutely 100% going to destroy psychological safety in that moment, in that relationship. If you are scared of your leader, if you are fearful, if you know you're going to be punished verbally for speaking out, you're not going to speak out. You're not going to say, "Hey, I think this is wrong," or "I need us to do this differently," or "I need you to hear me." That won't happen when you have a leader who is out of control or cannot control their own feelings.
Absolutely. It's like you lose the staff or the school year when you lose your cool. You know,
Expression. That's a great expression.
mhm.
absolutely. In the book, and you mentioned quite a lot the importance of empathy. So when I began I in my personal life, I'm an introvert, but as the principal, when I wear that principal hat, I am an extrovert. So at the end of the day, I'm exhausted, but it wasn't always like that because I was not really listening to people. I will say, for example, hey, Janet, how are you? Good morning. And I will keep walking. And I didn't really care what you said. It's like, check, check. I say, good morning. Check. I say, how are you? Check, hi. Um, and and yet I was wondering why everything is not working, right? Like I was not really being an empathic listener to build these relationships. So how can school leaders cultivate empathic listening skills to deepen the connections and resolve conflicts in school communities?
I think the first thing is just that they have to realize, like you had that realization. What made you realize that?
Yeah.
Because things were falling apart, right? So that's the first piece. And honestly, it's fascinating to us that at times when we do our trainings with our folks, that they've never been taught. They've never had anyone tell them, like a counselor or an analyst like Robin. It's every part of what you do, but in education, we don't necessarily get training on that. Only the school counselors do, or the school psychologists. But no, that's not a regular routine skill set that we learn.
And
So,
professional development can go a long way, especially with something like this. And again, it's the mindset. So this is important in our school. We're going to devote this day to everyone having a chance to develop or deepen the skill. We don't want to insinuate or tell people you don't know how to do this, because maybe they do. And some of people come more naturally to these skills. But no matter who you are, you can always do a refresher in deep listening and active listening. And what's amazing about the experiential learning that happens during our coaching work, during any coaching and any professional development where you have a chance to be in that dyad and be listened to, is you have that opportunity. My God, she really listened to me. He really listened to me. They really listened to me. That feels great.
mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that it does take time. If you really want to stop Janet in the hallway and hear how she's doing, you need to know your journey through that hallway is not going to be the split seconds that it used to be.
I have to tell on that a little tiny story because when I
Oh,
was
please.
no, but I remember so much this active listening piece was I was learning it. I was studying it. I was learning it for the first time myself back in the day. And I remember prior to that, people would be stopping me all over the place, and I'm A, getting nothing done. B, my ADHD's coming out, like, all these, it's like, whoa. So I learned from a seminar that I took with our colleague that I needed to be able to say, I really know that you need to have me sit down and listen, but right in this moment, I have a meeting I must go into, and
Yes.
I'd love to set up a time with you sometime later. When's good for you? And
Mhm.
the minute that you're able to do that,
Yeah.
they feel listened to, and then you follow up. But so many leaders,
Yes, yes,
so much.
Or
absolutely.
can't you see I'm rushing? Like, what's
Yeah,
wrong with can't you see I'm rushing?
yeah.
It's like you guys emphasize in the book this importance of professional development and coaching. I remember I was as a struggling principal. I registered for a seminar titled "The Emotional Intelligence School Leader." So I didn't know how to manage my time, so I was always late to everything. And I am coming late to the class, and as I come in, I will never forget the professor is reading a quote from Dan Goldman's article, and he said, "Emotional intelligence is the sine qua non of leadership." And ladies, let me tell you, he got me a sine qua non. I was like, that has to be what I have to learn, emotional intelligence. And the last step in emotional intelligence is the relationship part, which for me as a natural introvert was the most
Mm,
difficult part. And you have this beautiful story that you talk about Snow White and the seven dwarfs to foster these relationships. Can you tell us about this and how can this serve school leaders?
Well, relationships as we say, everything's about relationships. It's the job is about relationships, no matter how you slice it. And Snow White, I mean, that little example was just a way of saying, even Snow White had to know about building relationships, and she did. And so that was a way in which she got friendship, and her relationship saved her from the evil queen. And for us, for leaders in the field, it's number one. If you cannot build those relationships, well, first of all, there's a relationship with building those relationships and performance, and people
Yes.
don't think that exists. But
Yeah.
it's all about, well, you have to have the academic scores. Well, hello, if we could build the relationships and have the trust there, then we could help teachers learn. We could help make the changes that we hope for, first in ourselves and then in others. So I mean, Snow White, she learned. She was a good student, and as a result, she was successful. She lived. And I think principals, there are many times you feel like, when is vacation time? It's so
I
Robin.
I absolutely love the concept of um that you need to work together with people and have that mutual affection towards each other.
Yes.
And I'm a firm believer that you love the student by empathetically loving the staff.
And
Um,
yeah,
Well, I would say I would even add to that, if I may, just that
yeah,
you have to work with people. They're there. And so whether you like it or not, you are in fact working with people.
yeah.
And so it's a question of um, knowing how precious those relationships are and also how nurturing they are, not just for the people and the community, but for yourself. So really valuing the power of relationships to heal, to inspire. I,
You
I
know,
think that's part of good leadership as
it's
well.
a critical piece, Robert. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of a quick story that I have to share, and it's
Please.
about team development. Um,
Mhm.
you have your cabinet, we have the people we lead, and we all know that in today's world, everything is about teams. And so, for a leader, if hopefully you have some team people there, that you're not alone doing everything. As some schools, you don't even have an assistant principal. But
mhm.
if you have a team, or if you don't have that, you have to make it, because you can't do that job alone. It's impossible. And so I would just say that, in terms of relationships, you have to inspire, as Robin's saying. You have to be the one that brings that team on. And if you don't have a healthy team, then you have to figure out what you have to do. And the little story I just was going to share of a principal that we've worked with, and I won't reveal any names or anything, but that particular principal had a had assistant principals that were he felt, and he in his awareness, by studying emotional intelligence, he realized that he had not been good with them. He had not given them the leadership they needed. So he came to us and he said, I need help. I need to fix this. And as a result of the work of working with him and his team, it's coming around. It isn't fast. It takes time, but the commitment on his part as a leader to be vulnerable, to say to a group of people, I messed up, and I want to be able to make us the team that we need to be. So help me. Let's do this together. Wow, that's powerful.
It's so powerful as a leader to be able to be open like that. And that is compassionate leadership, being able to not only tune into what's happened that perhaps you caused and say that wasn't good, but to be open with the people who you hurt and say, I messed up.
Beautiful. That vulnerability piece. I love it. And the perhaps my last question is perhaps the the most important chapter in the book is about your coaching journey. Can you tell us about that? And because it's so important, yet we don't we in LinkedIn, in social media, we see the final product as if it was an architect build a building created by an architecture. And leadership is a continuous journey, yet when we say, oh, I'm going to go to a conference or I'm going to get a training, there's all these impediments. There's no money, or you have to be in the classroom, you have to be in the school. Can you tell us about your coaching journey and especially Star Factor?
Well, it's such a beautiful story because it really was our relationship that that informs the our individual backgrounds and our coming together that informs the coaching process. So, as a trained analyst, I know that it takes a while to move through. Wherever you are in the service of going somewhere, like setting your goal, setting your vision, telling your story, and to develop trust with someone doesn't happen just because you sit down and say, this is a trusting relationship. You need to co-create that space. And while our coaching is moments in the life of leaders where they can skill up. They can upskill, I think that's the word, upskill, right? And they can share what they need, their questions, they can share their struggles. And instead of somebody telling them what to do, the coach responds with questions because they often have the answers. And the answers are about how they're going to bring themselves to the moment. And that process of opening up to someone else is very unusual in education. And I'll stop in a minute, Janet, so you can talk to that piece as well. But the process of unfolding and being transparent is just a beautiful coming together of psychology and education.
I want to say, as an educator, I learned so much from Robin as we were building this model, because as she's saying, her training is so different. And I wish we had more of that in our field. I have to say, I think in terms of our work, that's one of the nuances that it's not that the world is not yet ready in education. We're always the last to get the good stuff. And I think that, for example, for Robin, it was really important that we have time as we're training and working with people to have what she called supervision. And for Robin, in her training, she had to continuously take her cases to a psychoanalyst, someone else, right? And you want to jump in, you can here. And then she'd get feedback and then go back and, okay, so what do we give them, the teachers, like even, and what do principals get? Who's giving them the feedback to be able to reflect and to think and then come back and try again? And, so that's been a critical part of our coaching.
Well, a critical part of training people to be coaches.
Yes, exactly.
And in coaching itself, just the question asking rather than the mentoring telling,
Yes.
very different. And also just the cherishing of your relationship with self. You're being able to really know yourself and giving yourself permission, as we would say at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, to feel all your feelings and to use that as information in the service of your goals, and to sit down and tell what you're feeling and where you're going to somebody who's been on that journey, not your journey, but that journey, and just is a little bit ahead of you, because our coaches are former leaders and educators. So you're talking to someone who really comes in with knowledge of where you sit.
Our principals often say, they call it therapy, and we say, no, 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 no.
You say it's therapeutic, it is healing, but it's not therapy. But I do want to go back to the training piece, because it is foreign to a lot of educators to have to do all this work to, you're training to be a coach. And so you have to coach other people, and then you have to get supervision, and then you have to come in and not show off.
For it too.
What?
And it's hard to bill for it too. So they don't want to pay for you to train your coaches while you're training their people. No. But it's critical. Sorry, I had to.
Well, and to come in not with your best practice, but with your most difficult moment, and talk about where you're stuck, and make that okay. Make that the reason that you're together. Let's look at this. How interesting. How important.
What's interesting also, I think, what's happening as a result of the coaching that principals and assistant principals and superintendents are taking is that they then go back and they become more coaching leaders.
Yes.
So the style of coaching, the style of leadership starts to shift when they start using the skill sets in their everyday life. And that's a whole other wonderful opportunity to have principals learn and be able to practice on the job.
Yeah.
Dr.
What else
Patti,
can we tell you? Yes, what would you like us? Are we done, or do we want us to tell us more about Star Practice?
I know that at least one of you have something, a deadline. I want to make sure to respect your time. But Dr. Patti, Dr. Stern, what a luxury has been reading the book. What a luxury is having you in the podcast. Thank you for making the difference. You have definitely made the difference in me, and I'm sure that in many more people.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to elevate our work, to elevate emotional intelligence and leadership. And we hope that we'll come back and have bigger conversations.
For sure. Get your copy of Emotional Intelligence for School Leaders, published by Harvard Education Press by Doctors Janet Patti and Robin Stern. Ladies, have a fantastic weekend.
You as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Patti Martinez.
Chulu.
And I love that production. Chill out.